Hi, welcome to this week's episode of the Wellbeing Show. My name's Noel, I'm your host. I've got some of my team with me today who are going to be talking about a new service that I've been setting up. For those that don't know, I have a company called Mental Health Works Limited, and I've now got a new one added to it, a new service added to it called Men's Mental Health Works, which comes from my sort of passion, both as a guy, I suppose, but also as a clinician, having worked with men over the years, and at times been quite despairing at seeing how psychological distress can be expressed by guys in particular. Um, and so wanting to do something about that, wanting to sort of put back a little bit. So I hope you get something from this show. So this is some of the people who are going to be part of the team in this new service that I'm setting up, who I'm just going to go around and ask them to introduce themselves. We've had a little bit of issue with some echoing on the sound, so people have got the mics off, so it might seem a bit stilted, the conversation, but we'll do our best to get through it and see what happens. So I'm just going to ask folk to jump in and say hello and explain who you are. Some of you will have been on this show before, so I'm just going to go round in a round robin context. And Sherezade, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hello, Noel and everyone. It's a great pleasure to be back on your show. I've been three times already, so it's always
Right.
great to be back. So I'm Sherry. I'm a therapist. I specialize in neurocardiology and mental health. My background is as a cardiac nurse, in essence, and also as a mental health nurse. And I currently run my own private practice and seeing a broad variety of conditions and mental health issues. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks. Richmond, you're next on my clock face. Do you want to say hello?
Hey, Noel. Yeah, good to be back. I'm a multidisciplinary pain specialist. I've got a background in nursing, physio, rehab, pain neuroscience, coaching, motivation interviewing, a bunch of other bits and bobs. But it all comes together. I call it pain coaching, and I help people who are suffering ongoing pain, typically chronic pain, and quite often work in multidisciplinary teams, actually, multidisciplinary mental health teams. And I do my best to bring the mental and the physical together and say, no, they're not separate, it's just one, as you know. And I'm always banging that drum.
Yeah, I'm banging it with you, mate. Sarah, you're next on the clock face. Do you want to say hello?
Yes, hello. Yep, so I'm Sarah. I'm a therapist and I specialize in trauma. I work with modalities including eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, internal family systems, talk therapy, and I run a private practice and I also work with other clinical multidisciplinary teams.
Great, thanks. And Tom, say hello.
Great to be here. Yes, so I'm a psychotherapist working in private practice predominantly, but my background is working with addiction and domestic abuse, working with male perpetrators. So two areas that definitely come under the men's mental health banner. So yeah, glad to be here.
Thanks for that, folks. So I guess I'm always interested in why people decide to become healers, because it seems like a bizarre thing to do with your life, to be honest. So I guess that's my first question to folks. What motivated you as individuals? And anybody can just jump in, just sort of unmute yourself and jump in. What motivated you as an individual? I guess what I'm asking is, how did you get to this point where you're interested in helping other people? Whoever would like to jump in first with that very broad question. Go
I'm
on,
happy to.
Richmond, off you go.
I just found myself unmuting my initial reaction is I have no idea. God
Yeah.
knows. I just sort of find myself here, going with the flow of it. I mean, I sort of laugh when I think back to school and my mates and certainly my teachers, if they discovered any of them are still alive, what I do, they'd be like, "What? No, no chance, no chance at all." So, but it certainly feels right, and it feels where I should be for
Yeah.
whatever reason that is.
No chance because, I mean, I'm partly you're joking, but partly you're being very serious. Why would they say why would they be surprised by where you are now, do you think?
I mean, I wasn't bad at school, but I was sort of, always sort of up to something. And, I was sort of more interested in sport and probably girls and drinking and smoking and, the stuff that you do when you're at school. Well, stuff that we did and my mates did. But my first training was as a nurse, you see, and I think that sort of surprised quite a few people. And I was between the police, actually, it was the army originally. And I always remembered saying to my teachers, well, I don't need to work at these A levels. I only need 3Ds to go to Sandhurst. And they're like, yeah, right. Actually, guess what I got at A level? 3Ds. And I always, and I always, and I always remember the walking into the
Definitely officer material then.
well, yeah. I mean, I remember walking into the bit where you got your results, and Badders, he's a fantastic Latin teacher and classics teacher. He's a great guy, real character. He slapped me on the back and said, "Oh, you've done really well." And I thought, "Oh, I've got my predictions because I was predicted 3Bs. I mean, this is a long time ago, and Bs for A level then was pretty good." And I was like, "Oh, okay, you got 3Ds." I'm like, "What? That's good, is it?" So their expectations of me were pretty low, and I wasn't really interested in work and learning and stuff. I was just interested in having fun,
Yeah.
which I did. I had a lot of fun at school. And then ended up, yeah, doing the nursing, which was amazing. And that changed my life actually. Probably more than any of the other things changed my life.
Okay. In what way, Rich?
Because I was, I had a privileged upbringing in many ways. I went to a boarding school and whatnot. I mean, it was nothing special as such, but it was, it was privileged compared to many. And I had a really good time there. And that opened my eyes to the realities of life and suffering. And a good friend of mine started my interest in Buddhism back then, and so it just made me think, wow, there's this whole world of stuff going on, and I just made it my business to go and get involved and see everything and anything I could. I mean, there was very little I hadn't seen by the time I'd finished that training. And I knew I didn't want to continue on that path as a nurse, but it was just amazing, the stuff, the patients that I met and the tutors I had, teaching me things about life and people, just unbelievable.
It's interesting. I mean, I would echo, you didn't say it directly like this, but there's some sense in which, when you join the NHS, which I did as well, it's a very leveling experience, and illness and health is a very leveling experience. And particularly, I think, psychological health, that I've never been able to tell the difference between the suffering of one person and another. It's got nothing to do with their background, and it's got everything to do with their suffering. And learning that lesson was a real eye-opener for me, because I came into it with all sorts of assumptions about who suffers and whether they're allowed to or not. Sort of, and having that challenge was a very interesting, it continues to be a very interesting experience. Sarah, I'm going to pick on you just because I feel like I can. So why on earth did you become a therapist? What sort of terrible thing did you do in a previous life?
That was a good question. I think if I'm, really honest, a lot of the drive, if you unpick it,
Yeah.
a lot of the drive for me to become a therapist, and work with people in a supportive or healing capacity was in a bid to do the thing that I could do for others that I couldn't do for myself. So it was in a bid to understand myself, how I ended up in certain situations, what had brought me to this position in life, how did I get here, who was I? And rather than saying, oh, I'll just go into therapy myself and find that stuff out, it was, I know I'm going to help other people that are suffering because I know what it's like to suffer. But part of that was definitely driven by the need to kind of work myself out and heal myself.
Yeah. Do I remember rightly, you started off in nursing as well?
Yeah, pediatrics.
That's right. Yeah.
So pediatrics, and then left that and went into something completely different, which was marketing.
Yeah.
And I think part of it was running away. I find working with kids quite difficult, and so part of it was running away from myself, even though obviously I followed myself. and which I later discovered. And then, as I had my own kids, then I started working back in that field with Bernardo's, in a different capacity, but supporting new mums, in hospital setting, and community. So
It's interesting, that thing about having kids, I think. I went to a conference, and our Prince of Wales was there, the current Prince of Wales. He was there with his brother when they were still talking to each other. And they were both on stage talking. Very interesting conversation about sort of mental health. They both just set up Heads Together and all that sort of stuff. Um, and William talked about his experience of trauma, which only became relevant to him after he became a dad. He suddenly realized, he went, boom, I'm really messed up.
Well, I think kids activate us. They trigger us, and all the trauma then that you have accumulated over the years or experienced get triggered by having your own kids, and then you're left in this position where, do I want to pass that on? Do I want to be the parent that I had, or am I forced to look at myself and figure out?
Almost literally the words he used.
Yeah.
I mean, he said something along the lines of, I don't want my kids to have this that I'm carrying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want something better for them. And just thinking about him and his brother and the trauma that they went through, the very public trauma that they both went through with the death of their mother, and then the world demanding that they be on stage about it. I'm not sure I could have coped with that. So very interesting. Tom, do you want to jump in and give us some sense of what on earth did you do wrong to be here?
Lots. What did I do wrong? I guess I had suffered from a young age from anxiety and depression, whether that's from upbringing, bullying, who knows, it could have been numerous things. And I found tremendous support later in life, more so, through therapy and finding various groups that have allowed me to find sort of community and identification. And being able to turn my life around and have kids like other people have mentioned, and then be faced with the things that the kids show up in yourself, has been amazing. Not great whilst you're training, having children, because especially my training was heavily psychodynamic. So I was like, I'm doing it all wrong. But yeah, I like helping people. The help that I was given pretty unconditionally is something that I would like to give back. And seeing people change is just a wonderful thing. Seeing people change from all different positions and ages in life. And that was only made possible to me by finding the space to do that. So,
So again, a sense of a personal journey. I remember in my training, which was back in the day when dinosaurs still existed, and but there was a requirement, there was a course requirement to demonstrate personal change, and they didn't say what that would look like. I mean, they didn't make it that easy. Actually, somebody was failed on the course I did, on the year I was in. Somebody was failed on that criteria, that they hadn't demonstrated personal change. And she was devastated. I mean, she went back. That was the point that caused the crisis. My memory, though, of having to demonstrate personal change and experience personal change through the therapy I went through in my training was just how tremendously difficult it is to change. And all arrogance I had about people should do this or people should do that went out the window. When the should was me, I was like, whoa, hang on a minute. It's like, it's not so easy. So, Sherry, save the best till last.
You're right.
Did you do wrong? What's your
How
story?
on earth did I arrive here, Noel?
Quite.
What did I do? I can't remember my past life, so I'm just going to, say what I remember.
You'll have to stick with this life. You can't go back in time, right?
Yeah, so a few things that Richmond and you said resonates a lot with my story too. As you know, I have a background as a ballet dancer, professional ballet dancer for a number of years, and then I went into nursing. Thinking that that was a degree that would allow me to continue my dancing career.
It's a real job to get money from, yeah.
It's actually a real job. So the universe slapped me on my face repetitively throughout the 4 years degree. But I found myself being able to change from very toxic behaviors that I had with myself, but also with the world. So that was thanks to my degree in nursing. And when I decided to specialize, as a I ended up being, quite a high band in the NHS, band 8, one of the very few arrhythmia specialist nurses in the NHS. That's, at my back. I realized that I was a person that enjoyed so much talking about talking with my patients. Like, what took you here? How did you end up here? What's your story? So I was the typical nurse that wasn't, I'm comfortable saying it now, I wasn't the best nurse in the world. I could sit on on a bed for a very good 40 minutes while my colleague was waiting to put the meds. So I collected a few complaints from my colleagues, and then I said, "Listen, we need to change this, right?" I was given the role of the ICD counseling around an entire Hammersmith hospital, which I nailed it. And then I realized, listen, I have to do something with this. I'm good at listening to people, but also when I listened to my patients, I'm incredibly rewarded. So I was in that state of flow, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing in life. It's very strange to explain, but it's a feeling that I never ever experienced before. Not even in my dancing career, throughout the degree. It was just when I was there with my patients. And most of the time, both in cardiology and mental health, the heart and the mind are so closely linked together. So if you really listen deeply, you get the story, the trauma or trigger, whatever it is, you get the story from the person if you learn how to listen deeply. So anyway, I realized, listen, I have to do something with it. And I embarked myself into a further 3 years of training in the NHS, those days are called, you probably know this, Noel, a counselling degree within the NHS. And as you said, heavily judgmental. And very, very, very structured within its own NHS system. So I guess that it was just like, I don't know, life guiding me through what I'm good at and what I was, born to do. I personally, I'd like to share, I don't have children. I'm not a mom, but I thoroughly put everything I can and what I've learned with my clients and patients. And that's the best answer I could give, Noel.
Thank you.
Really.
I mean, there's an interesting theme, I think, which is threading through everything that people here are talking about. There's a sort of myth or story, isn't there, of the wounded healer, which goes around and comes around. And so I think that's here in the story, but that's a quite well-trodden path. There's another bit, I think, and I'm interested in this and what you think, folks. There's something about giving back and discovering the capacity to give back as something that is useful for me as a person. And certainly my experience, my training went something like, I was wanted to help as a way of avoiding some of my own stuff, without a doubt. What I discovered when I learned how to help was that I couldn't avoid my own stuff. I had to deal with my own stuff to effectively help. And people are sort of nodding away, and I wonder how you might explore that, how you might understand that. The reason I'm asking these questions is I think particularly with men, and we'll come to this later on, there is a resistance to being helped because there's a fundamental deep shame that a lot of guys have about being a total failure and being weak and having to not accept help, but be the person that does, the active one, not the and help seen as a passive thing by men, if that makes sense. And we'll come and discuss that a bit more. But this dynamic of helping and being helped, and learning to be a professional helper. I wonder if you want to, if anybody's got any thoughts around that, what their experience was professionally and personally. Tom?
I'll come in. I think what you said is so true, that I can't help effectively unless I've done the work on myself. There was lots of people I were on my course with, and this was not to down them, but hadn't had any therapy, wanted to become therapists and whatnot. And when we came to some of those sticking points of showing how you changed or how you understood yourself, they found it difficult. I mean, I found it difficult as well. And even in my infancy as a psychotherapist, getting in the way, wanting to do too much, wanting to cure people, wanting to solve problems for people rather than just being and listening with people. I think, as you said initially, it's a great distraction if you've got your own problems to be a therapist, because you can focus on someone else, which on one hand is a great tool. On the other hand, it can really get in the way. And I don't know, there's something about the cyclical nature of being helped and helping, which I think is really lovely. It means that we all need each other. And if we all need each other, then we all need help at different times. And I think that's a really important thing to remember.
Yeah, so there's something there about leveling, and about equalization.
Yeah. Humility. Yeah.
Yeah, no, a nice word. Thank you. Yeah. Other people are nodding. What do you think? Just jump in, folks. Tom, yeah, Rich,
I'm happy to jump, Noel.
go.
Oh,
Just
sorry,
need my
everyone.
permission.
I'll
Off you
go.
go, Sherry.
Thank you. I was nodding because those that come from a nursing, background, one of the pillars in nursing is to really create trust with your patient, right? So when you create trust with a person, you also need to trust that that person is going to tell you their story in the best of their capabilities. So how are you going to understand the person's stories if you haven't actually made peace with your own? Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of judgment around what you hear. So that relationship starts when when you're being helped and you're being held and heard too. And that happens when it comes genuinely from you. Otherwise, a person doesn't really have the ability. It would have the ability, but is unlikely to have the ability unless you've thoroughly done the work yourself. And you see this in clinical practice all the time in many different sectors, as you know, Noel, not only cardiology, hardcore, in mental health too. You see professionals that they haven't done the work themselves. The level of compassion, empathy, and many necessary skills that a therapist may have is not there if you don't do the work with yourself, because we project what we have. So if you don't have it, how are you going to work with it?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that my degree actually helped me, my nursing degree, and that's why I was nodding.
One of the things I'm going to come, Rich and Sarah, I'm going to come to you in a second because I want you to contribute as well. Or you just tell me to get lost because you don't have anything to say on the subject, which is unlikely, but there you go. Sherry, there's an experience I know you've had, and just thinking about this work, doing the work, whatever that means. I mean, it could mean different things in different modalities, but let's frame it slightly differently to working with people that need help is going to have an impact. Working with people in distress is going to have an impact. Whatever your own personal background, that's the truth. And you had an interesting experience, which many health professionals had during COVID. You had to go and work on the wards again. You were sort of shanghaied back into the NHS to go and deal with people dying of COVID. And I remember you talking about that candidly, about the PTSD symptoms that you developed from that.
Absolutely. This is a topic that is very close to my heart too. So you've just touched a little, trigger, which is fine. I'm okay talking about it. But yes, it was heavily traumatic, and thank God that I was already a therapist. And I'm sure you remember that, Noel, but I developed a very short, training course for healthcare professionals to apply certain practices to regulate their own emotions. But yeah, so my training as a therapist was incredibly helpful through COVID. And many healthcare professionals are still going through, a complex PTSD. I've got no doubt about it.
That's the truth. Yeah. And I think the point I'm trying to make there, and again, this is about this service about wanting to help guys, is that I think that a lot of guys get into a position where they're trying to distance themselves from having other people have this emotional impact upon them, because they feel out of their depth when it comes to processing, dealing with it. And it is something that certainly I know you saw in terms of the hierarchies of the NHS, and it's very often men in positions of power, doctors who control it, and the denial that there is in any sort of healing arrangement, there has to be reciprocity for it to actually be effective, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Noel. Yeah.
So Sarah, Richmond, this whole notion of what is this exchange about?
Well,
Sarah.
I think doing the nursing first was informative in as much as we did lots and lots of psychological things and sociological things, entwined. And at that time, because I was pretty black and white in my thinking, I was like, well, what? No, just tell us about conditions and physiology and all of that. So that started to sort of seep in by osmosis because when I did sort of rehab and physio, it's all about fixing people. And of course that, well, we know the limitations of that idea. And there was no emphasis on self-care, but I just had my own natural interest in that. And I think it was the Buddhist influence that helped. So the work around compassion and gratitude and self-compassion. And so I sort of realized that I needed to create, for want of a better term, my own supervision. I needed to seek out my own mentors and guides because there's no obligation as a physio or as a nurse to have, and particularly working independently, there's no obligation to have supervision, which I fundamentally disagree with. I think that it's really important. And I do a lot of mentoring of clinicians for that reason. So I've sort of had to sort out my own, but I just sort of consider myself lucky that I, for whatever reason, had the insight to seek that out.
Yeah. Sarah, do you want to contribute something to this part of the conversation?
Yeah, I just pick up on, the challenges in looking, or when you're working with other people, making sure that you're okay yourself, because you can't, as Tom said, help somebody else unless, you've dealt with your stuff. And I think that, in the training that you go through to get your degree as a therapist, as a psychotherapist, it's very intense. And I was almost angry that I was being forced into this position where I had to work with my own stuff.
Yeah.
And I hated my tutors for putting me in that position, even though I obviously put myself there. And I learned very quickly that actually, in wanting to rescue somebody else with whatever it is they're bringing, it's actually that I'm trying to rescue myself. So often we make interventions as just general human beings. And I think for men, one of those interventions tends to be more solution focused.
Yeah.
So when you're sat with someone who has an issue, and it might just be, I need you to hear my grievance. But for men, they often, and I'm generalizing this because women do this too, but often then men jump into this position of like, I need to fix that. And when you turn the lens back around and you say, actually, what is it that I'm trying to fix? Because it's actually me feeling uncomfortable with what you're bringing. Your presentation is making me feel very uncomfortable, and I need to rescue myself from this uncomfortability. And so therefore, I'm going to try and find a solution, because if I can focus on this, it takes me away from what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And I learned that in my own process. So that's all I was gonna bring, really.
I mean, it seems to me that what everybody's talking about is that life is muddy and complicated and messy, and that whatever simplicities that we come in with, whatever clear lines that we might come in with, or even want and desire, that life comes along and says, meh, ain't gonna happen. Right? I don't know why my camera picks up on these hand gestures, but it does, and I don't know how to turn it off. But there you go. Such is life. I just gave myself a thumbs up. All right.
But something, I mean, Sarah, you just said something there that really resonated, that rescue. And I think I'm a compulsive rescuer.
Hmm.
Think, when you said that, I was like, oh my God. And I was with a friend of mine who has, really good insights. We were on a long journey and we were talking about all sorts of things. It got pretty deep. And I talked about something that had happened recently. And he said, that's your 7-year-old wanting something different now. And it is exactly that, exactly what you just said.
Hmm. And what does your 7-year-old want that's different? Can you say, Richmond?
I'm trying to remember what it was now.
No, you can't
I'll
remember.
have to ask him.
Okay.
But it was something to do with something that had happened, when I was younger and had found it difficult to process and therefore develop some sort of strategy, as we all do, and then sort of bringing that forward into adulthood. And at what point do you recognize that strategy was useful then as a kid, but now is actually causing you and potentially people around you problems, or people you're working with, or loved ones?
That's a really good question to start the conversation about why do you want to work with men? Okay. Sarah, do you want to jump in? You look like you have a motivation to jump in there.
Do I? Yeah, no, I can go. Why do I want to work with men? I think that men are find it very difficult to access therapy generally and talk about their experience from an emotional perspective. I don't think we give men the language as young boys to communicate how they experience the world internally. I don't think we give them the language to feel safe enough to be able to express their experience of emotions. And then as adults, we are expecting them to be these wonderful partners and be able to, raise children and all of this stuff that requires some emotional connection, not just to the other person, but to themselves. And I think that they struggle with that. And I think we are letting men down, boys and men down, because we as a society are producing an environment where they aren't safe enough to be vulnerable and just be really authentically honest about their experiences. And so my motivation is to not only because I think there's a personal aspect to this, because I was which I've spoken about on your other shows.
You've talked about this, and
Yeah.
it's up to you if you're comfortable sharing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was in a 12-year marriage, in an abusive relationship, and so it took me several attempts to leave that. But what I was left with was, this is the father of my children, and I want to be able to foster a positive relationship for them with their dad.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, men need better support.
Yeah. So you've got some skin in the game, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is fair enough. I mean, it's reasonable, isn't it? That, why do I want something? Because it's going to make my life better. It's not a wrong or a bad motivation. So, if I talk very personally, I grew up with an extraordinarily violent drunk as a father, who came from a long, dishonorable line of violent drunk men. And so I grew up being terrified of guys. I mean, it has to be said. And I did everything I could to avoid sort of male company and maleness, and that isn't true anymore. I'm not afraid of my own maleness anymore. Myself and my brother have talked about this a lot, and both myself and my brother were terrified of our own capacity to be violent. Neither of us are. That's the truth. We're both really nice guys who wouldn't hurt a fly. That's the truth. It's sort of like, but we were terrified of it. So sort of inside our heads was this idea of men who are dangerous and violent and unpredictable, and all this sort of stuff. And so my personal journey has been to understand that as a man, I'm not. That actually I'm quite a nice guy, and I'm relatively predictable, a bit lazy. I need to lose a bit of weight. I'm pretty good at some things and pretty rubbish at other things. It's that sort of stuff. But it's been tough to get to this point where I feel okay with myself. Tom, you've got a real, I know, a drive, a fire around internal worlds, and particularly for men and internal worlds, because Sarah was talking a little bit about that, about the idea that guys need to learn how to talk to themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, working with perpetrators of domestic violence was amazing. Hearing the lack of role models they had in their life, the people that they then chose as their role models, and people in just as desperate situations as themselves, and yet idolizing them and putting them on a pedestal. Where do you ask for help? Where do you talk about your feelings? There isn't a space, and I guess I believe that the more spaces we facilitate for men to come to, the more they can do that for other men, whether that be their children or people in their wider community.
Yeah.
You just aren't there. Most men do it at 2 a.m. on a bar stool or in a kitchen, high or drunk, and then forget or want to forget that they've said it, the next day. And we need to try and break that.
Yeah. Why did you get involved with perpetrators? Was it accidental, or was it
Yeah.
We're all gonna
It
do
was during my therapy training, and I needed a part-time job, and someone else I knew was working there, and I worked in fashion for like 15 years, and I was deeply bored by it, and it came up and it worked fit in with the pattern of my college, and I started doing it, and they liked me initially because I could use all the computers, which no one else could, and then I got really into the therapeutic side of it, and I really believe in the power of group as well, seeing one man get vulnerable and that sort of having a domino effect on the rest of the group. And I just, yeah, it was hard to hold at points, and there was a lot to face, and some really volatile characters. But it was interesting. It was a 24-week program, so you could see little incremental changes. I wasn't going to say like in 24 weeks we solved all their problems, but it was interesting how certain characters within the group would hold power. And they sort of became the role models. And then as soon as they got vulnerable, it allowed the other men to do so in turn.
Yeah. Vulnerability is an interesting word, I think. And Richmond, you're nodding away there. Vulnerability from Mr. Public School Boy who was going to join Sandhurst. I mean, that
Yeah.
what?
Actually, I mean, it's not really as it sounds. When I heard you saying that, I didn't immediately think of me as such. It was a it was a pretty down to earth school. But having said that, yeah, there was elements of survival. I guess I was lucky because I was pretty good at sports. So in that way, life is easier at school if that happens. Um, being vulnerable, I think with my mates, because a lot of my mates, male friends, are we got a fairly big group, and we've known each other since some was going back to 7-4. So we're in our early 50s now, so we've known each other for a long, long time. And I think to varying degrees, we've always been pretty vulnerable with each other, as in being open to talking about stuff. There was no holding back, but equally there's varying degrees of, I mean, everyone's been pretty successful and some like very, very successful. And I think this sort of humbleness in the group, everyone's brought back down to the same level when we get together. No one is allowed to kind of get too far ahead or anything like that. But equally, I think looking at our conversations together and this, the place that now in Wales where we sort of gather, there is a real vulnerability there. But I guess that depends on your group, and that again is something that's very, very fortunate for us.
Hmm. And what do you think you gained from it?
From that vulnerability. I think over the years I've come to understand myself more and more and more in terms of being creative and being I'm sensitive. I pick up on things, and I always have, and it's made sense of stuff that I used to pick up on previously. And now I suppose now I allow myself to do that. Whereas when I was younger, I probably didn't. I blocked it off. But now I allow myself to be, and you know as a sort of a practitioner of mindfulness and meditation, I get that's one of the things that I really use to allow me to be present, to allow and notice a lot more, rather than get caught up in things. And that, I mean, that's a real reality for me, is to work on a more of an energetic, get beyond the body so much, beyond the five senses, and be able to really sort of feel what's happening, and be happy with that, and be just like, yeah, this is fine.
And it seems you have a network from it as well, from who you are, the way you are as a guy, as a person.
Yeah, and like really desperate. I mean, some of my friends say, "God, so many different people. From very well known people who are lovely through just wide, such a wide range. If I sort of listed all the people that I knew, of all different backgrounds, and I love that. I just love that.
Sherry, I want to bring you in because of this thing about vulnerability. I have a sense in which vulnerability is the way into the tribe in some senses. And I want to bring you in as somebody because I'm thinking about this thing about stress and distress and loneliness and isolation. And I want to bring you in with your heart specialism background. And how does stress and distress and loneliness manifest in that heart sense?
Sorry, Noel, I missed you a bit. Specifically in the heart, you
Yeah,
mean?
just from your background as somebody who's a specialist in helping people rehabilitate from broken hearts, as it were, medically broken hearts.
Broken heart syndrome, actually, Tatok Tubo, that
That's
it
actually
has a name, by the way. Uh, Yeah, well, a myriad of, side effects and complications from stress. And when I explained it in my practice, I tend to explain it in two different ways. One is the physiological and biological body, the effects of, stress and trauma and anxiety, a sustained period of anxiety. And the second one is cognitively how our patterns of behavior changes, right? And it's important to make this differentiation so people understand that yes, even though the explanation we're understanding first one and second the other, they're linked together. They're all linked together. And it's so difficult for us, physicians or clinicians it is an art to really dig into and see which one is your, increased anger that tends to happen, around, we're talking about mental health. Anger is a very interesting emotion that personally, as a therapist and as a woman living in this world, I tend to see a lot in men, not because it's it's not an emotion that it's more prevalent in men. Women also experience anger, but it's one of the very few emotions that men in a society have been able to express safely. And that's where a majority of this toxic masculinity culture, which needs to change, it's embracing or has embraced over so many years. It's like, men, it's also, even in certain, still nowadays, Noel, I'm sure you know, it's still very well seen that a man is more, abrupt, more, angry. That means that he's not weak, completely distorted visions, and then they create or they teach their sons to follow exactly the same pattern. So anyways, I'm getting a little bit off the topic, but I think
You're
anger
on
and the
topic. You're
explanation
on topic.
of why this emotion is so important, right? There's also an emotional flooding of not really knowing how to identify what happens in their own body, in their own physiology, and they're super dysregulated. My practice is a majority male. I do have women, right? But I do have a lot of male in my practice.
Yeah.
And some of the work that I do is to help them identify that, listen, this is not anger, this is sadness. And let's work around being vulnerable, choosing who you're vulnerable to, because that's also one of the very interesting, works that we do, right? And let's explore anger, sadness, frustration, guilt, right? So that's on one part is also how our behavior changes. But on the more physiological or biological is the one you asked me, you have a myriad of, an explosion of things that happens. First, there's a higher chances of, when cortisol is higher in the body, there's a higher chances of becoming pre-diabetics or, having higher cholesterol deposit in the main arteries of the heart because of how the cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline change works. And then we have the physical burnt out, which refers to the mental burnt out. We have people that start having, episodes of apathy and tiredness and severe fatigue. That's burnout. As a consequence, we become more, lethargic and more like a couch potato, as I used to call it, which is all a product of how stress and anxiety manifests both in the body, but also in the mind. And I wanted to add here and to finalize, I talk a lot, Noel, good luck. I wanted to finalize, when we do cardiac rehab programs, we evaluate, at least in my practice, we evaluate thoroughly both subjective and objective outcomes on this, cardiac profile. One is objectively what's going on with the person. You can do psychometric assessments, you can do many other, mental health evaluations to see how this person is coping with the change, but also physiologically. You have to work with this too, otherwise you would not see, the change that a person actually needs to have. It's equally important to work with your mental health, with your trauma, with your inner child, with your family system, with your schema modes and all those stuff. Great, super important. But hey, let's work at what the body's saying, because what's the meaning of us working when then you're not taking care of your lifestyle, your exercise, not your weight, but how you feel with yourself, your interoceptive awareness. So that's why it's a complete holistic profile of, of understanding a person's story. And basically that's what took me here. And
and there's something there, I think, we can all go with, which is this idea that what we're trying to achieve with this is something that is that dreaded word holistic, which I can't bear, but I have to use because what else am I going to use? But this idea is, I guess, and we're coming towards the end of the show, this episode, we might come back to another one, but this idea that this, you use the word toxic. I prefer patriarchal masculinity as opposed to toxic, simply because I'd like to place it within a political and cultural context as well. That who is actually gaining from that version of masculinity? Yeah. I mean, who actually, I don't see that I gain from it, particularly as a man, as a human being, but as a man in particular, it's not something I aspire to. My experience as an individual is that as gender roles were freeing up from the 70s, and I grew up in school in the 70s, I'm a bit older than most of you here, that actually my life chances broadened, they didn't narrow. But yeah, as you're talking about this anger stuff, it really resonates with me. I know anger well. Like as a guy, I know it really, really well. Just yesterday, I was angry because I was a bit low in mood, and that's where I can go because that's what I've been taught to do. I can recognize it and I can discuss it, but that's where I go, is towards that. So looking at that, I'd like to know, what is it you want to individually as clinicians add into this? What would you like to offer in terms of this service, really? What are you bringing to this table that you're passionate about, that you want to give to fathers and sons and men and husbands and boyfriends? And also at some point we'll be talking about daughters and wives, etc., because we want to include them into this. But for now, what's your passion here in terms of what would you like to offer to the guys who might come into this service?
I guess for me it's very simple, really, is offering a space that men with time and trust feel that it's okay to actually speak about what they're really feeling, like in really, really simple terms. It's not a space that's afforded to many men, as you say, because they set their aims and goalposts at this patriarchal system where they need to be strong, they need to be big, they need to be this, they need to be successful, wealthy, whatever, well dressed, all of these things. And it's just, like you said, I don't know who it serves, this chase, who it serves. It's embedded in our culture. It's embedded in films, TV, the news, everything. But I don't think it serves anyone. And just hopefully, maybe even sharing some of my own stuff as well, which is something I wouldn't necessarily do in therapeutic services normally. I think can be quite beneficial in this. That's saying, look, I identify with that. I've been through something similar to that. And it may not be about the detail, but just showing that understanding. And I hope that with giving that understanding in a space that the other men may be able to use the space in the right way.
Yeah.
I think I'll just add to that and just say something very similar, really. That it's just being able to offer men a space where they feel safe enough to be able to explore and unpick actually what's going on for them. And I think, something that Shara picked up on, which was, anger. Actually, often men express lots of emotions through anger, and actually underneath that, anger is always protective. And so when you recognize anger as protective and you ask the question, what is it protecting? And often it will be sadness or fear. And so, those two things, sadness and fear, are something that guys particularly find very difficult to admit to, or to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm fearful of this thing, because, in our society, we don't allow men to be fearful. They're supposed to be the protectors, and they're supposed to be the ones that have the solutions, and they're supposed to be the providers, and that is a very patriarchal society, but that is fundamentally, even now, the message that we're giving young boys. And so being able to unpick it and say, it's okay that you feel sad, like sadness is really normal, or it's okay that you're fearful. Let's sit with that or work with that. what is the sadness or what is the fear, and unpick it, and just to offer a space that is safe enough for them to do that without fear of judgment.
Yeah.
I think is really important.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll go now. Just I think if I could summarize it, how my intervention could, there's a broad variety of amazing therapists here, but perhaps the cornerstone of my approach is nervous system regulation through different techniques, breath work or therapeutic breathing practices. In other areas, it's called pranayama, MCBT, mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy, meditation, mindfulness, etc. And teaching men specifically in this context, but people in reality, is to use breath as an anchor during emotional storms. And I think that's very, very important. The emotional regulation. And this is just not about relaxation. It's about teaching self-regulation tools that men can use independently. And also helping them to understand that we're moving from a reactive response, as Sarah just explained, anger is just almost like the iceberg, but underneath the sadness, frustration, and emotions that they don't really know how to recognize sometimes. So from this reactive response to an emotional state, creating a space between the trigger and the reaction. And so that's basically how I think my expertise and my input can be of use, regulating their nervous system, and of course creating a space that is safe for them to talk, but basically a space for them to really feel.
I think just drawing on what I've done before and sort of creating this caring crucible, this caring connection where it's helping them to connect with their body and their experiences. And actually, I must admit, I feel very humbled by, all of your work and experiences and what you guys do. And I just sort of see my role, I guess, as it's less structured, perhaps, or maybe that's an assumption about what you do. But the conversations I have with people, with clients, are I'm sort of myself with them. I try and just be very natural and I guess friendly, but we are doing some work, so it creates that opportunity for them to connect with their bodies, in as much as that's how we experience the world, but that those inner experiences are generating the outer experiences. So with my background in neuroscience, I can then bring that element to give decent, really up-to-date explanations as to how our systems are generating these experiences, sort of making sense of what the experiences are at the right kind of level for them, and then how to harness that to come to the present moment, to be open to the infinite possibilities that are only available in the present moment as opposed to the past coming through. So I see that work as very much interlinking with the amazing stuff you guys would do as well. So
Thanks. So I hope people are getting a sense here of the sensitivity and complexity of this, I guess, landscape. Let's call it a landscape that we're navigating, and also the sense in which it's a shared journey. The alternatives, it seems to me, are the criminal justice system, abuse of self via substances, isolation, loneliness, abuse of self by anger. Anger is a very toxic, high stress emotion that will kill you. It's as simple as that, without a doubt. Sherry's nodding away, and Sherry has seen that so many times on wards as they stitch people's hearts up. And they're always men having their hearts stitched up. That's the truth. My thumb again comes up. I don't know why that is. But also it ends up in guys being horrible to the women and children that they say they love, and they do love, but don't know how to express that to. Those are the alternatives. But I guess what we're offering is what we know works as individuals, because we've been there, that we've had to face our own stuff and change. We've had tough stuff in life happen to us, and we've had to repair and grow and rebuild lives ourselves. And that is the task, really. That is the task. And to do it as part of a supportive community like this. It was really important to me that this episode of the show be a group of people, not me, because that's what it is. It's about saying, come and join the human race because it's possible to be loved rather than hated. It really is. Okay, this is what it looks like. And it's a great place to be. I want to thank you all for making time to come here today. You stay there while I say goodbye to everybody. I hope you found that interesting. If you're interested, do get in touch, 07506 319 745 or info@noelmcdermott.net. You can find mental health works all over the internet, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. But I would say, as a man and as a human, the best decision that was ever imposed upon me, and it wasn't voluntary, it was imposed upon me, was that I have to change because life is ever evolving and ever changing, and standing still just isn't an option, folks. So do reach out. It's a new service, like I say, it's non-collusive in the sense of, there are legal issues here. There are child protection issues. There are protection issues around violence towards women, around domestic abuse. And, we're not going to collude with any of that stuff. You're not going to get justification, rationalizations for any of that stuff, but you are going to get love and compassion. And you're going to get sort of realistic services. So do reach out. Hope you found this useful. If you've got issues, give us a call. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye. Tom, Sarah, Sherry, Richmond, thanks so much for being here today. Lots of love to you all.